Three, two, one.
Hello and welcome back to the Let's Be Frank podcast. Welcome to season 8 of the Let's Be Frank podcast. As always, I am Frank Lopez alongside my wonderful co-host here, Frank Martinez. Frank, how you doing, man?
I'm doing good. Still feeling like a champion.
That's
Hasn't
right.
changed.
That's right. We got about a year to defend it, right? So we get to celebrate that for a little while here further. So thanks to you guys who came back and listened to that last episode where we kind of relived the magic of that postseason run and what that meant to us. So to start off season 8, we kind of still want to continue the fun of that World Series title. We don't want to totally look ahead because we do want to get into some free agency, things like that, some scenarios. But something fun we want to do with you guys is we want to continue the topic of those narratives that were busted, right? We talked a little bit in the previous episode how as the postseason went along, it felt like narratives were just kind of falling off of the Dodgers. The fun analogy that we made was Forrest Gump like running and then the uh the leg braces kind of just shattering off of him and he's able to kind of just take off and run. So we had some fun with that, and we've been kind of just been chatting back and forth for the last couple of weeks. Like, okay, what are some narratives that were busted? So in honor of the Dodgers' eighth World Series title, we came up with 8 narratives that we felt like were busted. So as you guys listen to this, if you guys feel like you're coming up with your own, or some that feel like or if you guys feel like there's some that we kind of left off, feel free to comment and let us know because we're interested in what you guys have to say about this as well. Um, but let's get right into it, man. So, narrative number one that the Dodgers busted, quote unquote, by winning this 2024 World Series is that the Dodgers are buying titles. Um, so I think there's maybe a lot of other fan bases that want to laugh in our face, right, when we say that, Frank. Uh, but uh, but what do we mean by that, Frank? That we're not buying titles?
Well, essentially, it's just that a title can't really be bought. It takes a lot more than just throwing money at high priced talent to win a championship. And I think the Dodgers busted the narrative that says that that's all you need, or that's all they're doing. Because there's been plenty of seasons where the Dodgers had the top payroll in baseball and did not win. And on their way to this title, they had to beat top payrolls in baseball, payrolls that were ahead of theirs in order to win a championship. So it's definitely a narrative that's out there, and I feel a narrative that was busted with this postseason run.
Absolutely. Yeah, you touched on those larger payrolls. Obviously, if you're just kind of tuning into baseball during the postseason and you just hear headlines, you hear LA versus New York, LA versus San Diego, division rivalries, things like that. And those are fun little narratives, right? But the fact of the matter is that the both New York teams, the Mets and the Yankees, had higher payrolls this season than the Dodgers. The Dodgers were the number 3 payroll, and they had to get through the number 1 and the number 2 payroll. And it's not like the Padres payroll is that low either, right? Something we do want to point out, and it's a graphic that I saw. I don't know if MLB Network put it up, where uh, obviously this past offseason, the Dodgers committed more money than any other team and probably in history, right? 1 point something billion dollars.
Yeah.
Um, 1.3, I think, billion dollars, between 1.3 and 1.4 billion dollars to like 3 different players. Uh, Backtrack one season before, the San Diego Padres committed about 900 million to $1 billion to their players, right? To their payroll in the future. Well, they didn't make the postseason last season, right? They made it this season. Um, and then this season they got bounced in the division series by a division rival, right? So it's not how much money you spend, it's what the money speaks to, right? It's where you allocate the money. And Frank, could you just talk to us a little bit about how the Dodgers just do it better than everybody else when it comes to how they allocate their finances, so to speak?
Yeah, for sure. It's not just on talent, on field talent. They spend money organizationally. And I think the term that is thrown out a lot within the Dodgers organization is organizational cohesion. So whether you're an A ball, double A, triple A, all the way up in the minor leagues or on the big league club, you're the training approach, the synergy between each level is the same. And so it makes for a player that is the development is just smoother, level by level. And so when you get somebody that is developed in house within the organization and they arrive, they're almost hit the ground running. They almost are a step ahead of maybe other talent across Major League Baseball that might not have those same advantages. And we're making the big league club is a whole different culture or a whole different stylistic approach to training and to preparing than when they were at Double A or Triple A. With the Dodgers, they spend that talent, that money on talented uh, instruction, talent, the analytics department, of course, and just all across the board, front office, coaching. And that's something that people don't realize when they throw, they see the headlines, but the Dodgers are impeccably attentive to details and they make improvements when there's a detail that was missed. And so I think that that's just one big way that the Dodgers are ahead of the game when it comes to what they're putting out there on the field, everything that you see, but also what you don't see and what's behind the scenes.
Yeah, yeah, and to add to that, like, okay, obviously, if you look at a World Series poster, right, and you see Shohei Ohtani, Freddie Freeman, Mookie Betts, Yoshinobu Yamamoto, Jack Flaherty, Tyler Glasnow would have been on there, right? Obviously, those players cost money, right? Those are guys that we obtained either in free agency or in trades, and we,
Right.
extended them, and we offered them these contracts in the hundreds of millions of dollars. Right? That's not something we want that we're choosing to ignore here. That's a very real thing. Um, right. But what we're speaking to is obviously how the funds are spent. And look, guys, the when you talk about headlines, other teams make headlines too, right? Let's go back to I don't know how many years back when the Mariners signed Robinson Cano to like a 10-year, $250 million deal, or when the Angels signed Albert Pujols, right, to a similar deal. Um, that's fine, right? But do you have the infrastructure in your franchise, in your organization to really sustain and uh and really maximize that talent? Probably not if you're a team like that, if you're an organization like that. But here's the thing, right? Here's the thing that a lot of teams fail to see. They think, oh, it's because it's the Dodgers, right? They can quote unquote afford to have this infrastructure, right? All of these things cost you less than what that Robinson Cano contract costs you,
Right.
right? Like it's not it comes down to a commitment, right? Commitment to wanting to be the team that or the organization that's in the mix every single year, right? There's a few teams that I want to tip my hat to that aren't the Dodgers, right? And maybe in the last few years they've been a little bit of a laughingstock, but a team like the Washington Nationals, right? The Nationals, up until their World Series title, were going for it, right? They were spending the money. They were going after guys like Max Scherzer um and hitting on their minor league talent, right? Like they obviously drafted Bryce Harper, but what they hit on the way up, to I mean, ultimately they let go of Bryce Harper and then they won the World Series, right? But keeping guys like Juan Soto in their system, guys like Trey Turner in their system, Anthony Rendon, guys like that, all the while adding the talent year after year to eventually get to winning a World Series. That is, an example of an organization that probably doesn't have the resources the Dodgers has, but still is committed to having that success, right? And yes, a team like that, an organization like that is probably going to reset once they win that World Series title, right? Because
Okay.
it's probably not as sustainable to just let it ride. But don't be surprised if, here in the next few years, the Nationals are right back in the mix signing free agents, right? With the bolstered, farm system and young players. So it's possible, it's out there, right? If you're a team like like the Angels, right? Let's stay in our market. If you're a team like the Angels and you have gone after so many free agents that, let's just face it, they don't work out, right? Name them. Albert Pujols? I don't think it really worked out, right? Josh Hamilton, Anthony Rendon, CJ Wilson, guys like this that it just
Upton,
doesn't
yeah.
work. The list goes on and on and on. Um, doesn't it make more sense just to say, hey, let's go steal the number 3 scout from the Dodgers, or the number 2 or whatever, the AAA coach from this organization that's doing it right, and really build an organizational philosophy? Because you mentioned all the things that the Dodgers do, right? It really comes down to your philosophy. What's your
Yeah,
philosophy, right? And is it uniform from the bottom to the top? Doesn't it make more sense, Frank, for like a team like the Angels or a team like those types of teams, organizations, to do that instead of saying, hey, let's just put makeup on a pig and sign this guy to hundreds and hundreds of $1 million and put butts in seats, quote unquote. But you're out of it by July, by the All-Star break every single year. Don't you think that makes a little bit more sense?
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, building the infrastructure and having some sense of identity that you hang your hat on, um, whether you ultimately meet your goal or not, but you have a foundation. It just feels like it's not foundational to put makeup on a pig. You're just finding yourself at square one, if not the season after that, soon thereafter. And I think that's what a lot of MLB teams or franchises, that's where they are.
Mhm.
And you do tip your hat. You mentioned the Nationals, but there are more and more teams that are doing things, if not the Dodger way, but a way that is similar or a way that is sustainable, more so than others. The Braves come to mind. Their approach is a little different. Throwing money at risking by throwing big contracts at their really really young talent, and the Brewers are kind of following in that same lead. Uh, I've got the Orioles are up there, so there's like a lot of other organizations that are starting to have a philosophy, like you just said, and really aim for continuing that instead of just um, making headlines.
Yeah, yeah, and that's where you get to like, oh, how does a small franchise compete with, a team like the Dodgers? That's not when you think about the A's, yeah, the A's shouldn't. The A's shouldn't be in the same league in the same the A's should get relegated at this point, right? For what they're doing, not only to, on the field, but to their fan base, right? But um, teams like that, okay, no, they don't deserve the White Sox, like at least where they're at right now. Um, they don't deserve to compete with teams like the Dodgers, but the teams like you mentioned, like the Brewers, like I mentioned, in previous years, the Nationals, um, right now the Orioles, right? The Orioles are kind of a perfect example of that. The Orioles are a couple of free agents away, I think, right? That's kind of what it feels like, but with crazy, crazy young talent. Um, we'll see if they go for it, right? Because in years past they've not, right? I think they've swung and missed on guys like Chris Davis and stuff like that too. So it really comes again down to your scouting, your vetting of your free agents, things like that the Dodgers do right. So yeah, man. I mean, like, look, Freddie Freeman. Look at his contract. It's not a ridiculous contract.
No,
It's not. How many teams do you think could have gone after a Freddie Freeman,
at that
right?
price.
At that price. Now, granted, let's be fair also, right? It was later into the free agency. Everybody thought he was going to end up with the Braves. He didn't. The Dodgers can kind of react and sign a guy like that, right? Um, but regardless, to have at least the foresight, that I mean, what is it, a 6-year deal? Making what he makes to do what he just did in the World Series, anybody would take that. Anybody would take it, right? And any team can afford it. Don't let them think they can't. Don't let you think they can't. So,
Right.
um, so when we say money doesn't buy championships, money could make you lose a lot of money too. You know what I mean? Like making that commitment to certain players, but not having the infrastructure to really do that. And look, we haven't really even talked about Shohei Ohtani yet, right? Yeah, 10 years, $700 million gets paid out over the course of 20 years, whatever. Um, but the Dodgers have the infrastructure to surround a guy like Shohei Ohtani with everything he needs to really maximize. let's talk about what he did this year, Frank. 50-50 season, right? Unanimous MVP, World Series title, right? Didn't even pitch yet, right? In his first season with the Los Angeles Dodgers. The Dodgers are built for a player like Shohei Ohtani. 29, 28, 27, 26, 25 teams aren't, right? Like
Right.
who knows who is, you know. Um, but do you think he has this type of season if he ended up with Toronto, right? And so that's when you got guys like Roki Sasaki, who's gets to basically come to the major leagues and choose who he's going to play for, right? The list is from top to bottom, pretty much any team because of the price tag. Um, everybody's going to be in the mix. Well, when anybody can afford them, but they still end up going to a team like the Dodgers, which
Right.
that's what tells you it's not just about the money, right? It's about what the money speaks to um and the commitment that these organizations are making. Um so that's the number one narrative, right? That's narrative number one, right? Maybe not the top, but narrative number one that we chose to speak about. Any other points you want to add to that, Frank?
No, I think it's we laid it out as clearly as we could.
Yeah. And look, that leads us into like the roster construction side of things, right? That we touched on a little bit. Um, and the narrative that the Dodgers were kind of a home run or bust team, right? And that's what it took to win a World Series. That's the second narrative that we're here to bust. That the Dodgers were home run or bust. There was look, Dodgers hit a lot of home runs. Don't get us wrong, right? But talk to us about Game 5, Frank, of the World Series and what it took to win that game.
Yeah, that'll always stand out in Dodger lore as for such a team built on power for sure and capable of power. The fact that they accomplished what they accomplished, coming back, erasing a 5-0 deficit on the road in a hostile crowd and doing it without hitting a home run, and then going down after doing that. A lot of times that'd be deflating for a lot of teams, right? You talk about the momentum swings and still just being right there and knowing we're gonna get it done. And they do so again without hitting a home run, 2 sac flies to tie the game and ultimately take the lead. And I always go back to Mookie fist pumping. I showed that to the 14U team I coach. I'm like, look at Mookie Betts. As soon as he hit that, look at what he did. Like, you know what I mean? That just speaks to the fact that whatever it took, they were willing to do. And when you hear um, some of these interviews from the players and the Mookie Betts on base podcast was an amazing listen, and you just talk about that fact that at the plate they were willing to do whatever it took. Freddie wasn't up there looking to hit a grand slam in the 10th inning of game one, but he got a pitch he could handle and he hit it with authority. Uh, but then in game five, when he comes up and moves the lineup along in that fifth inning, he hits the ball up the middle. And I guarantee you, like for him, yeah, the moment of the grand slam's more top, but the fact that he was just as happy, maybe not as just as excited, but just as happy to go up the middle, score 2 runs, and pass the baton to the next guy as he was ending the game with the grand slam. And I think that just speaks to, yeah, it's absolutely not a home run or bust team. They busted that narrative for sure.
Yeah, and we touched on it last episode too about how much we love to just hear Freddie Freeman talk about hitting.
Right.
And he talked about that at bat too, right? He talked about I think it was a 1-2 count or 2-2 count,
Right.
where Garrett Cole threw him the nastiest changeup that he had, and he
Dotted
fouled
it.
it.
Yep. Yep.
And he knew at that point, like that's it. Like he got nowhere to go because he already threw his breaker, he already threw his changeup, spoiled them. He's got to come in with the fastball. Jammed or not, he put a good swing on it and he found some grass in the outfield. And that led to Teoscar Hernandez getting, and which a swing that was pretty much, it was a home run swing, right? Um, but because of where the defense was positioned, like everything mattered is what we kind of want to get to, right? Um, look, the New York Post article that came out, I think it was Joel Sherman talking about what the Dodgers scouting report was against the Yankees, and it was just to basically play baseball, run hard, put the ball in play. They took it to heart, man. They took it to heart, and it takes those Mookie Betts type players, those Freddie
Right.
Freeman type players. That's what it takes, right? And look, not to speak ill of past teams, but do you think hate to say it because it's my guy, do you think a Matt Kemp has that type of approach and that type of, Yasiel Puig, right? Um, history tells us that they probably wouldn't have, of Cody Bellinger, at least when we had him, right, in those moments. Yes, each of those players had their own moments, but what were those moments? There were balls getting hit over the fence.
Yeah.
And for every one of those balls got hit over the fence, how many times did they swing and miss at sliders off the plate or whatever, So, yes, the law of averages plays out and then you get what you get with that kind of talent. But to be locked into an at bat, right, and know exactly what your team needs in that situation, um, right, and to run a ball out, right,
Yeah.
to run a ball out, to hit a squib up the first baseline, identical to your first at bat, which looks like it's going to be the identical result, but to not take anything for granted and still bust a hard 90 and be safe at first base, to get the first run of the game across the board, right? With one hit. Like
Yeah.
the only hit was, I think at that point was Kike's hit, right?
Yep.
So to lead off the inning, to break up the no hitter, to not take anything for granted, right? And you talk about your 14U team, and that's what you want. Like that's what you want these kids to just learn in life, right? Don't take anything for granted, right? But when baseball teaches you those things, it's a beautiful thing. Um, so obviously we're busting the home run or bust narrative, but it goes a lot deeper than that, right? And it's a team that really just um, doesn't take any of the details for granted, right? And has a method to the preparation and is ready for it when they see it happen. Um, and yes, the Yankees gave us gifts. They gave us gifts, right? In that inning specifically, it all manifested itself, but it wasn't an accident, right? Dodgers knew exactly what they were doing. Um, and there's a lot of players that don't run out that ball down the first baseline. A lot of players that we eliminated on our path to the World Series,
Yeah.
right? That don't run that ball out. And um and Mookie Betts did.
Yeah.
Mookie Betts is a generational talent, right? Top five, top 10 player in the league, pretty much every single season. Um, Perennial All-Star, Hall of Famer. He's gonna probably go in with his Dodger hat now, which is nice to know. Now he's got two rings here in LA. But I don't know that anybody would have sweated him for not running that. You know what I mean? Like I don't know that I would have. Like if he just kind of dogged it to first base and Rizzo takes it himself and whatever, I don't know that I would have even given him a hard time, right? Because it was just a can of corn, but he ran it out, right? And that's what this year's team had that maybe years past, So we're
Yeah.
talking about busting narratives. We're not trying to tell anybody that these narratives have no basis either. You know what I mean? Like we understand. We understand why these
Yeah.
narratives are what they are. And they've been confirmed over the years, right? But with this 2024 team, they shed it off, man. They took it off their backs and they rode it to the World Series, man. So it was so much fun, right?
Yeah. And then that one play alone, Mookie, hard 90 in those circumstances, it's such a microcosm of just who did it, one of your superstars, right? And a bunch of the role players have made that made it set, made it known that when you see the best of the best on your team and they're working hard and they're doing drills and Freddie's, doing his drills and Rojas, well, Rojas is not one, but they follow that lead. They are the example, and that's part of what we said earlier. Just the organizational philosophy. And there's a reason the Dodgers went after Mookie Betts of all the available superstars in the last few years.
Hmm.
There's a reason why they're willing to throw the kitchen sink at a Shohei Ohtani. And so Freddie Freeman, the players they choose to hone in on and say, yes, we will commit. long term to these players, it's for a reason. It's because it
Hmm.
fits. And so yeah, it's definitely we're privileged, from that standpoint.
Yeah, and look, and what that equals over the long course is like that adds up to Tommy Edman being your NLCS MVP, right? How many stars are on this team? Tommy Edman was our NLCS MVP, right? And if it wasn't Tommy Edman, right, it would have been like Max Muncy, right? Like
Yeah.
it's guys that it's not the big names necessarily. And I know those guys have done things for themselves in their career, um, but it's not the names you're used to hearing. That's what adds up to a World Series title in the fashion the Dodgers did it. So we talked about a little bit about the offensive side of things. And so for our third narrative that we're busting, we're going over to kind of to the other side of the diamond, to the pitching side of things, right? And it's one um, that gets articulated a million different ways. But the way that we decided to was that you need four starting pitchers to make a World Series run. You need four starting pitchers. That starting pitching wins championships. And I don't want to bust that narrative because you do need good starting pitching to win a championship, in my opinion. But this one specific that you need four starting pitchers to win a championship. Frank, I don't think in this run since 2013 that we've been making the playoffs, we've ever gone into a postseason where we knew every fourth game was going to be a bullpen game, have we?
Not that I can recall.
Yeah. I mean, and because of injuries, I mean, you know, the the bullpen guys kind of just knew like, yeah, we're going to be the fourth guy. We're going to be the fourth guy. Screw it. Like here we are. And and they took pride in that, right? And it led to a World Series title. So, um, and bullpen games look different all the way through, right? They look like game 4 against the Padres where it was absolute dominance, right? Also looked like game 4 against the Yankees, where it was like, hey, these guys are just going to come out here and wear it, right? But each time it kind of served its purpose, a lot to do with Dave Roberts. Um, but yeah, man, you talked to us a little bit about the how the starting pitching situation and the pitching altogether kind of played out to win this World Series.
Yeah, I think it just speaks to like you mentioned, the fourth starter, if you will, was the bullpen and as a unit. And they on Mookie's podcast, they essentially all spoke on that and talked about how I think it was Kopech and maybe Hudson both said we knew that after Brazier started that one game, we knew that we can come in the second inning, or we can be called in to close the game out in the ninth inning, and we're ready for whatever. Like it doesn't matter.
Hmm.
And again, organizational structure, philosophy, the fact that you have the buy-in from all of those guys to say, "Yep, I don't care. If my contribution is best served in the third inning, then I'm going to be ready to go in the third inning, and I'm going to do my job. And then the next guy's going to do his, and we're going to just go down the line that way."
Hmm.
And they had that mentality going into the postseason.
Hmm.
And I just can't speak enough on how insanely um, cohesive that is. You know what I mean? Because all it takes is one. All it takes is one little, kind of dude saying like, "Man, I should really be the guy closing," or for whatever reason, I have no experience. I mean, and how many guys could have that claim? You know what I mean? If they wanted to.
Yeah.
Trina could be like, "Dude, I got the most experience." You know
Well,
what I mean? Or
I've been here longer than all. Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah, yeah. Hudson say, "Hey, I've closed out a World Series before. I've gotten the final out." Uh, a Kopech said, "Dude, I got the nastiest stuff,
Yeah,
man." Like,
nobody throws harder than me. Come on, we've
yeah,
been there.
but no, doesn't matter. I'm here to win as a team, and I'll do whatever that takes. And so, as a unit, we did have a four starter, so I guess, but it was a bullpen.
Hmm.
And so that narrative that you have to have four guys that can go 6, 7 innings,
Yeah.
The Dodgers showed you don't necessarily have to have that, but it takes a special group of guys, man, to be able to get it done.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. It takes a special group of guys that's managed the right way and coached. I mean, honestly, too. Like you have your
Yeah,
bullpen coaches, you have your pitching coaching staff, all that type of stuff. Um, that got that buy-in and not only does it take accepting that that role, right, where you can come in the third and the fourth, and that could be the leverage spot of a game, right? And that's the language they use, right?
yeah,
Hey, the fourth inning was the leverage, right? And yeah, because why? Because that's the inning you're going to face Soto, Judge, Stanton, whoever. Um, and it's not the any number. It's not, I mean, my belief is that it's not just accepting it, it's embracing it, right? They
yeah,
embraced it, right? It's almost like, yeah, let me come in and shove in the fourth inning, like, and kind of taking pride in that too, right? Like, hey, um, I love how the game has gotten there, right? And it's not what I grew up with, right?
no,
I grew up with freaking Eric Gagne, right? Like
yeah,
get the ball to Gagne, right? That's what it was. Get the ball to Gagne, whether it was Guillermo Moda or whoever, um, get the ball to Gagne. But eventually that turned to get the ball to Kenley or whatever. Um, but it was a slow burn, but it finally got to this point, right? Because there was
yeah,
a window of time where Trinan was the closer or where Evan Phillips was the closer. Um, but in this case, it was like, no, it's like, dude, leverage is leverage. And that's that, and yes, it does take a certain pair to be the ninth inning guy in a sense, but has that always been practical? I don't think so, right? I don't because they say like, oh, it takes a certain pair to blow a save one day and come out and get a save the next. But why go out for the save the next? Why not just the next day come in the seventh inning when you really need it? You know what I mean?
yeah,
Like why does it have to be that? And so yeah, it takes an embracing of that role, in my opinion too. Not it takes more than just accepting. It takes embracing it and these guys really did that, right? And it took a special and unique circumstance, right? Talk about a guy like Michael Kopech who was playing for nothing the day before he got to the Dodgers and all of a sudden he's playing for a World Series title. Um, and that's a guy who's, I mean, let's face it, was on the verge of being a bust for his career, right? Like it was a guy that was a highly, highly touted prospect and had some off the field stuff with whatever, and look where he is now,
yeah,
right? And that's because of the culture that the Dodgers were able to cultivate. I mean, that was um awesome, right? And as a pitching guy to my core, I mean, to see that, I was like, man, that's awesome, man. And turning in what they did is they turned a a deficiency into a strength is what they did, an advantage, right?
yeah.
With that,
Even not even just the leverage spots either, but Max Muncy telling Brett Honeywell in Game 5 of the NLCS, like, "Hey, you doing this and dying on this hill out here for us, you
literally,
won
yeah,
us Game 6
yeah,
before Game
yep,
6 even arrived."
yeah,
And guys being willing to do that as well.
yeah. Yeah, because for Brett Honeywell, it's a guy that didn't even make the NLDS roster. You know what I mean? And just knowing the role, right? But if you look at Blake Trinan, it's a lot easier to accept your role when you see those guys accepting their roles, right? And being flexible in their roles, right? Because then who are you to say, no, that's not me. I'm not going to do that, right? I mean, it takes every bit of so much leadership, right? And shout out to Daniel Hudson because if you listen to any of those bullpen guys talk that guy was the leader of the bullpen.
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
I didn't
I
either,
didn't.
but they
I
all
had
say it.
no, and they all say that was their guy. That was a leader. Um, and that's a guy who had played with the organization, left, came back, and like you mentioned, that guy's closed out a World Series title. He's thrown the last pitch of a World Series before, and closed it out in a Game 7, mind you, and a a remarkable career, right? And in that remarkable career, there's lowlights too, right? There's
Yeah,
moments where things weren't as great, especially in the Dodger uniform, right? But shout out to Daniel Hudson for really embracing that philosophy as well, right? Understanding, especially where he was at in his career, knowing like this is it. I mean, it's my last season, whatever it takes to win a World Series title. Well, if a guy in his last season is willing to do all of that and willing to embrace all of that to get to a World Series, um, I think it's so valuable for the younger guys in our organization to see that, to have that type of urgency throughout their entire career, to this whatever it takes, right? Because yeah, eventually they'll maybe have their day where they get to be free agents and cash out on that and whatever. Maybe they'll be the closer for another team that doesn't get it, right? Right. But while you're here, like no, this is the role that you're gonna play, right? And the role that you're gonna play is we'll see, like whatever it takes that day. So, um, yeah, man. And I think sometimes having a closer would maybe handcuff us a little bit at times because you have that ninth inning locked in. Maybe you got to compromise yourself on the way to that ninth inning and put guys in situations maybe where they were not ready or what have you. Um, so that's the narrative that we busted where you don't need necessarily for starting pitchers. But I maintain that our three starting pitchers did every bit that they needed to do, right? I mean, Jack Flaherty, Yoshinobu Yamamoto, and Walker Buehler. I mean, um, in order for all that to work, those guys also need to do what they did, right?
Right.
So it's not that you need no starting pitching, right? But maybe that you need four, maybe not, right? Not this year. So, anything to add to that, Frank?
No.
All right, so let's get on to the fourth narrative, right? And this is where it starts to get a little fun. Um, that the Dodgers are a regular season team and postseason chokers. Um, again, we understand all the ammo and all the ammunition that has led to narratives like that. Um, but it's 2024. And the 2024 season's over, and the Dodgers are World Series champions, Frank. So, how do you think that narrative got busted this season?
Um, I think what really played or what history is going to look back on, the major contributing factor, just winning the World Series, of course, but the path and the fact that they had to go through the Padres. See, I mentioned this last episode about how, when you're coming down to the final weeks of the season, you're like, oh, should we position ourselves a little better? Maybe give ourselves a better matchup if we're fall down to the 2 seed, then we get the Brewers or whoever it was, I forgot, but uh, Braves, Mets, or something. I'm like, look, you're gonna have to face a good team, at least one, to win the World Series. Like that's just the fact of the matter. Look at the Yankees; they had their path. They had
Yeah,
who was it that said it? I think it was Derek Jeter said if the Yankees could choose their path, this is the path they would choose. All right, on the way to the World Series, and they finally had to face a good team, and it didn't work out so well for them.
yeah,
So the fact that they had to get through the Padres, they had to fight that adversity and win that series from the jump. Um, we talk about. I've heard a lot of people say this. I certainly felt it, and I know a lot of fans and maybe even players felt that after the Padres series, there was some sense of relief, some sense of, like just breathe, like you could breathe just. And I certainly felt that as a fan. There was some sense of me that was thinking, like, I think they're going to go all the way now. But even if for some reason they didn't, it's like in 2021, beating the Giants in the NLDS. Obviously, I hate the fact that we lost to the Braves. We should have beat the Braves. I really believe that and rematch the Astros. Um, but the fact that we beat the Giants after chasing them all season long, there was some sense of relief after that NLDS series,
hmm
you know? And so I think just the fact that they had to prove themselves in that tough of a matchup to not just us, their own fans, prove it to themselves and to the rest of baseball to shut that narrative up. The chokers coming off the last two postseasons of dominant regular seasons and then just flaming out in the NLDS, getting swept the previous season, losing in 4 games the season before that, the division rivals. Uh, that's gone forever. Like no matter what happens next season, it doesn't matter. You know what I mean? You can't. The narrative is busted.
Yeah.
And among all the things to really feel joyful about as a fan, that's one of the big ones.
Yeah. No, they got over the hump, right? That's what they did. It would it would have been devastating to go out 3 years in a row to a divisional opponent in the division series. That would have been heads would have rolled, right? Like Dave Roberts probably would not have been the manager after this season. Roster might look different next year. A lot of things could have happened as a result of that. But they got over that hump, right? So uh, it took a concerted effort, right? It didn't just happen on its own, right? This whole thing where these guys basically committed to like, hey, for 3 weeks we're gonna piss off our wives. Like it's gonna be the boys, right? That's really what it's gonna be. Um, I'm so grateful for that, and I want to thank the Dodgers' wives for for
Yeah, sure.
for putting up with
Wow.
that um because it mattered. It absolutely 100% mattered, right? To have those watch parties between the wild card and the division series, to take the team playing before the families, right? That's a big one, right? That's a huge one for them. They don't want to travel without their kids and without their wives, right? Like, but they travel with the fellas, with the boys, and who knows what that looks like after the season, or if they're gonna keep doing things like that, and if who knows what that looks like when the year they don't win, like how they're gonna feel about it. Um, but it worked this season because they had to do it. They had to
Yeah.
do every bit of that, and um, it shows to just how dedicated this team was and how committed they were, and just how um, they would not allow themselves to be beat. I mean, that's just really what it came down to, right? Win at all costs, right? Uh, so uh, it took, like I said, it took a concerted effort. It took really acknowledging what had happened in previous seasons, right, to be able to bust that narrative. Because again, these narratives sometimes are earned.
Yeah.
And in this case, man, like, hey, every year 2020 was getting further and further away, and look at the way we were going out. So when you lose to the D-backs in the first round, come on, brother, come on. And when you lose to the Padres, and mind you, in 2022, the Dodgers handled the Padres all
Yeah.
season, and then losing to the Padres, um, to just get punched in the mouth over and over again. This season was the best version of the Padres we've seen,
Yep.
right? It wasn't 2022. This season was the best version, and the Dodgers got over that hump, and it was massive, right? So, um, I think um, I think it was huge, just those decisions that they made in order to be able to kind of wrap from round to round, keep the focus and do what they had to do. I mean, I think um, that was massive. I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
No, I just say that in the Dodgers busting that narrative for themselves, they've handed that narrative to some other teams. Now the
Yeah,
Yankees, the Padres, and
yeah,
those teams now have to deal with that of, no matter how good their regular season is going, no matter how good they look going into a postseason, now they have that dark cloud hanging over themselves, and the Dodgers don't.
yeah. Yeah. And look, in order to get over that hump, certain individuals needed to get over that hump as well.
Right.
The one that we're going to go into next is the narrative that the Dodgers couldn't win because of Dave Roberts, only in spite of him, is a massive narrative that got busted this season,
Huge.
right? And that's a narrative that a lot of us believed, man, right? You go back to 2020, and I talked a little bit about it last episode, but I think the highlight of his career before this season was the 2020 NLCS. Um, and so, and here's the thing, when people talk about, and we'll get into the whole Mickey Mouse thing, when people talk about 2020 season being different, being this and that, the, nobody ever brings up this point, but this is the only one that I'll maybe ever give them if they bring it up, is that the NLCS was 7 games in 7 days, and that never happens, right? It's never like that, right? So it was inherently different, right? So it was a battle of testing depth, 7 games in 7 days, whereas that's not really how the postseason works, right?
Right.
It's not a test of depth. It is you get days off after whatever amount of time. You get that little 3 games in 3 days run, and that's kind of where it gets tested. But 7 games in 7 days, um, it became very obvious who the deeper team was. And look, I think that's where Dave Roberts really shined, right? Using the depth, right? Using the last reliever on the roster, using the last bat off the bench. Um, but aside from that, I mean, it seemed like when the Dodgers would win, it was kind of in spite of him, right? He would make a questionable bullpen move, but the offense would reward him, right? The lineup looked a little funny that day, but the pitching would show out when they would win those games. But ultimately, it only led to one World Series title. This year, Frank, this season, the Dodgers won because of Dave Roberts.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So if you can just kind of go in depth a little bit, I know we talked about it last time, but touch on it again.
Yeah, just the fact that, you know, to that narrative, people would say like any manager, you just plug in any manager with, in 2020 and the Dodgers win the World Series. Or in other postseason runs, you plug in any other manager and they probably go farther than the Dodgers win. And so Dave Roberts had that narrative that the Dodgers, if and when they win, it's in spite of him, not because of him.
Mhm.
But this season, it's absolutely because of him. Meaning, you plug in another manager, it doesn't happen. Just the moves, the buy-in, the leadership, the way he handles a team with stars. I liken it definitely different personality types, obviously different leadership types, but very similar in when the Lakers had Shaq and Kobe and other, all stars around them and or high level players around them, and Del Harris was their coach or Kurt Rambis couldn't really get over the hump. But they
Mhm.
brought in Phil Jackson, and everybody knew because of his track record. And the same thing, and Phil Jackson had proven that before with MJ. MJ had other coaches before Phil Jackson arrived
Mhm.
and won. And so I liken Dave Roberts to that same fact this season.
Versus
It's
is a versus the old version of himself, right?
versus the
Like,
old version of
yeah,
himself.
that's
This
crazy.
improved, upgraded version of Dave Roberts,
Hmm.
he was the guy to lead this team
Yeah.
in season one of the $700 million player to paired with Mookie Betts and paired with Freddie Freeman and all the MVPs and all of that. He was the guy to man the ship and steer them in the right direction time and time again, get them through troubled waters with all of the injuries and still have, man, nobody would have faulted him or the team if at some point they're like, come on, another injury and another your ace glass now going down and
If
just
pitching, if pitching was the reason the Dodgers didn't win, right? Like
right.
if that had happened, yeah, yeah,
But the fact that he was the guy, it proved that that narrative is gone forever. Like he led this team to the World Series.
yeah. I really like the Phil Jackson comparison. The other one would be like Mark Jackson and when Steve Kerr took over the Warriors, right? Like what he did and what the levels he took them to, and um, we've seen that play itself out in sports, but this is a unique one where it's like, hey, the Dodgers kind of stuck with their guy, and he, busted their own narrative of himself, and that's so rewarding, right? To kind of see that, right? Um and to be proven wrong, like in a lot of ways, with that. And so with Dave Roberts, I mean, I think it took a maybe a level of almost desperation, right? Like he had to make this work, right? He had to make it work this season. And so when he got his back up against the wall, this is the route he went, right? And so I mean, our prayer is that that's the way he manages from here on out, right? Like, and so,
Yeah.
because he probably bought himself a nice little extension, right? But the way he managed this season with his back up against the wall, uh, from an employment standpoint, right? Um, I just, we hope to see that, hope to know that that's the Dave Roberts of the future, and regardless, he got us this one, and it's super super special, and this is where we get to say, oh, it couldn't happen to a better guy, like the
Yeah.
guy's just relentlessly positive, relentlessly, right? Annoyingly at times,
Yeah.
right? When we're just like, dude, but people that follow the team closely enough know that there's just so much, like the Dodgers are so tight-lipped with so many things, and it takes a certain person to be able to manage that, man. And that's, like the Freddie Freeman rib injury, things like that. I think the one time that Dave Roberts like let it slip, right, was when they talked about how him and they had the meeting with Shohei Ohtani,
Right.
and and we're kind of like, what are you doing, Dave? Like, but aside from that, I mean, he's kind of been impeccable in that standpoint, and so much of the job he's always done right. So it's nice to see that this part of it, man, it came to fruition. So, um, that's really, really, really special. And yeah, man, pay the guy, pay the man.
Yeah, absolutely.
Uh, yeah, and look, and to continue the topic of individual narratives that were busted, another one, and this is a player that's in the lineup, and we touched on him a little bit earlier, Mookie Betts, right? Mookie Betts being an unclutch player. Is a narrative that was busted this season. So I know you listened to to both of those podcasts, right? The one with him with the guys, and then the one with him and Dave Roberts. Is there something in that you kind of got from Mookie that shed some light on kind of why he had the results that he had?
I know he said so. He mentioned in the episode with the guys where he went into this postseason feeling like I don't have all that weight on my shoulders. I don't have to go off. And it doesn't mean that I can just suck. You know what I mean? But
Right, right, right.
I don't have to go off. I don't have to just, you know, I can just produce. Uh, and there's just something to that mentality of it. They talk about like when you're in the moment of a high pressure moment, you slow the game down. Well, in a way, it's slowing the game down before the game even starts, right? Mentally,
Mhm.
slowing that heart rate down, the anxiety level, the nervousness. And I feel like he was well on his way to busting that narrative last season before the narrative really just kind of started to solidify itself a little bit with the performance against the Diamondbacks. But then this year, going into that final season against the Padres, right before I forgot who we played right before the Padres series when Shohei tied the game in the ninth inning, and then Mookie hit the walk-off homer to win, back-to-back home runs. I think it was the game, like 2 games prior to entering that final. It put the Dodgers up 3 games in the division instead of going into the Padres series only up 2 with the Padres holding the tiebreaker. I feel like that was big.
Yeah.
I haven't really heard him mention it, but it felt like to me that was huge. And then he played well in the Padres series, um, the NLDS, the NLCS, World Series. He showed out. He played like a Hall of Famer, and um, he didn't even have any iconic moment. There's no iconic at bat that you can point to. There's no iconic defensive play per se that you can point to this postseason run. Yet he performed, he produced, he carried his weight, and it allowed other guys in the lineup to do that as well. The fact that Aaron Boone intentionally walked Mookie Betts with Nestor Cortez coming up when Mookie was 0 for 5 in his career against Nestor Cortez. And the fact that the opposing manager says, no, I don't want any part of that,
Mhm.
tells you that the narrative is busted.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd argue he was the most consistent Dodger throughout the postseason, right? And um, look, you get these like snapshots of just a really bad series and it's a series that you lose, so you don't get away with it, right? So like last season
Yeah.
with the D-backs and the Padres and this and that. Um, a World Series run is a large sample size, right? It's not a small one, right? So to see how it played itself out over the course of three series, um, you look at his numbers out of Humboldt up right now, very good numbers, right? So it's funny when you say like okay, when he was talking about it, right? When he was saying like I just got to be all right, like I just got to be okay, like I don't got to be, you know, carrying the team or whatever. Um, Mookie Betts is all right, okay, is very good.
Yeah.
Like very good. It is back-to-back leadoff home runs, right? It's um making some really good defensive plays in right field. And you kind of hit the nail on the head there with the intentional walk. They knew they were gonna like in that moment, based off of what he's done, because I think twice in that series he had some sac flies um that that proved to be you know, very, very important. They knew that Mookie Betts in that situation was gonna probably be give the best at bat the Dodgers could
Yeah.
offer, right? So for him to do that for himself, right? And it was really special watching him and Doc talk about it, right? And the podcast that they did together, it was kind of like, hey, dude, like it was me and you. And it's kind of one of those things, like after the fact, you're kind of learning like how close of a relationship that they have now, you know? It's like, man, like that's really cool. Like I didn't even know that, you know, I didn't catch that throughout the season, you know, like that him and Doc were that close now. But it's because they kind of bonded over that. Like, hey, dude, we got this freaking monkey hanging over us. Where it's like we got to get this monkey off our back, like, and um, and boy, did they, right? It's just such a special thing to see that happen. And so, I don't know, man, like when you look back at when you hear back at old Dodger teams, the relationship that, for example, Tommy Lasorda had with Oral Hershiser or, Mickey Hatcher or what have you. Um, these are the ones that we're gonna get to look back on and be like, hey, like Doc uh Doc and Mookie got over the hump together on this one, and it's gonna be it's gonna be a fun one to look back at, and when you like I said, when you look at his numbers throughout the postseason, I mean, by far our most consistent guy, right? There's guys that had several big moments, but guys like Teoscar Hernandez who kind of seem to kind of just show up a lot,
Yeah.
But those guys had dry spells, like throughout, right? It's like, hey, when's Teo gonna do something? He's due. Mookie was never due. He was never due throughout this entire
Right.
postseason, right? He was always putting up, which was um, which was so valuable, right? And such a valuable part of that lineup too, because to hit after Shohei, right? And let's face it, man, Shohei, given his talent, might have had some of the worst at bats on the team, like throughout the entire postseason, right? And you take it, right? Because all it takes is one freaking swing, and so many times he gave us those swings. Um, but man, sometimes you're like, hey, Shohei, see a couple, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Shohei, let's learn something here. Like, let's learn something. And when he wasn't doing that, Mookie was still having good at bats and making
Right.
something of it, right? So, um, so I hope this is a whole learning experience for Shohei as well, like that. Hey, look what Mookie did this past postseason, right? You don't got to be all that. Like, you don't have to, it's fun to watch you hit a ball a million feet, right? That's cool. Um, but, you know, sometimes you got to just got to do a job. Sometimes you got to do a job, and with guys that are that talented, that approach leads to some incredible numbers. So yeah, man, it was just fun to see uh Mookie to shake that off as well, and like I said, I mentioned in the last episode, I think Mookie really became a Dodger this postseason,
Yeah.
right? And I think everybody were able to put their arms around him there. So anything to add to Mookie?
No, I like that point though. Him really just embracing LA. I think
Yeah.
going into the night, he's been to three of the last four Laker games. Um,
Yeah,
you
that's
know,
true.
um,
Yeah.
so yeah, just it's just me amazing. Him going into the Hall of Fame, Doc going into the Hall of Fame
Yeah.
eventually, and this will be a huge turning point for their careers. I think this specific
Hmm.
title run.
Yeah, and how we look back at them for sure, 100%. So shout out to those two. Into number seven. The number seven one, and this is a fun one, right? That we get to kind of dive into here, is that the West Coast is soft and that the East Coast is gritty, right? Um, I mean, that wasn't like a lingering narrative that the Dodgers necessarily had hanging over them. Um, but we certainly busted it, right? On the field, um, but even some non-roster help from guys like Ice Cube,
Yeah,
right? And Fat Joe, and kind of how consequential that ended up being. Um, but you want to speak a little bit on that, Frank? Kind of what the outside perspective is on that, and kind of how the way it played out.
yeah. I mean, growing up, in the being a fan of the Lakers in the '90s, mid '90s, um, I always heard that, and I would watch the '80s uh, Lakers Celtics rivalry, and and even before then. I mean, that rivalry stretched back to like the late '50s and early '60s. But I would watch and I would hear a lot about that, in fact, about how like the Lakers were glamour and Hollywood and Magic Johnson and and just a lot of finesse, and the East Coast were just rugged, and they talked even about how like because the East Coast has to deal with harsh winters and things like that, it just toughens them up. And whereas over on this side, it's we don't have that, so we're at a disadvantage of sorts when it comes to just overall toughness. And I remember just hearing that for years and years, and then I've heard a little bit of that too on the baseball side. Um, and the fact that we went up against the Mets and then the Yankees, two New York teams, and just the toughness of New York and um, all of that. The Dodgers absolutely had to be gritty. They had to deal with adversity. They had to deal with um, so much things not going their way, so many things not going their way, and just push through and persevere all the way to game five, going down 5-0 and saying, if we just get one run, don't let us get one run. Those are feelings that I would have had growing up as a fan if I was on the other side. If my team was up by five, like
Yeah.
don't let them get one run because it's just gonna fall apart from there. And the Dodgers flipped that completely. And there's just don't let do not. They talked about that. If we get
Mhm.
one, we're gonna feel good,
Yeah.
and they did. And then boom, 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 and it's like oh, and then I love the fact that when they said that when they tied the game, and then Stanton has that sac fly, and the Yankees retake the lead, they're like, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
We're good.
Yeah.
Like we're gonna win this game.
You got to score to win anyway. And they knew they were going to score. Like
Yeah.
that's what it came down to. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, for sure. And look, on that whole LA New York thing and how fun that was. First of all, how many California guys did the Yankees have? You know what I mean? They got your Aaron Boone and your Aaron Judge and your freaking
Stanton.
Stanton, Garrett Cole, right? First of all, it's a bunch of Cali boys, so okay. Um, but yeah, just the adversity the Dodgers had to face all the way through the season with the injuries. I mean, that we've touched on it a couple times. Um, but I mean, they talk about the pressure cooker, right? The pressure cooker that is, oh, they say, oh, it's a pressure cooker playing in New York, right? Because of the New York media and this and that and this and that. Um, I don't think enough has been said about the pressure cooker that has become of the Dodgers, right? Playing for the Dodgers, managing the Dodgers, right? And they've done it to themselves, right? Because of what
Yeah.
the expectations are, because of the payroll, because of um, shortcomings in the past, this and that. But that is a pressure cooker, right? And we talked about last episode the palpable feeling in the stadium when things aren't going right, and what the Shohei Ohtani home run in the game one of the NLDS did to kind of flip that on its head
Right.
and get through that. And but it's a real thing, right? Every year that passes by is a year further and further for when the Lake Yankees last won a World Series, right?
Yeah.
This year's 15, next year's going to be 16. If they don't bring Soto back, what are their chances? Who knows, you know? Um, and it's not even to necessarily make this thing the whole thing about the Yankees, but um, and it's more about our guys, but it's become an insane pressure cooker to play for the Dodgers, right? To be a fan of the Dodgers, right? To be in that stadium when when things are not going great in the postseason and knowing what's going to be written about your team the next day and if things don't shake out and um, and yeah, okay, chalk it up to whatever the weather and this and that. Oh, East Coast, West Coast, like whatever. Like, guys, these players don't. That's not an obstacle for them. Like they get driven into the stadium, they get driven out of the stadium. You know what I mean? Like that's not a factor, right? And uh, look, guys, in LA, we've been through our nonsense over the past 5, 6 years, right? Um, Given the pandemic and what the city of LA has been through, California just in general. And I know not to say that New York hasn't been through something similar, right? But um, I think just nationally, the things that have been said about New York and LA over the past 5 years, I tend to resent those things. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm like, man, like about Hollywood this, Hollywood that. That's not LA, man. That's not LA,
Right.
right? LA is Montebello, right? LA is Inglewood, right? That's LA, right? And that's where we're from, right? It's Whittier, right? It's, Hawthorne. That's Los Angeles, right? Um, but the narrative that they try to paint about what Los Angeles is and who's in LA and this and that, like, no, no, man. Like
Beverly Hills and Hollywood. Yeah.
that's fake, right? That's up there. Like that's not that's not the Dodgers fan base, right? The Dodgers fan base is real people,
Yeah.
right? The Dodgers fan base is you inherit that generationally, right? Like that's something that you're passing on to your son. That's something that my dad passed on to me, because of you know the players that we all rooted for growing up, and this and that, and it runs so deep, right? So it means something, right? Um, there's always a debate of is it a Laker town or is it a Dodger town? Um, it really just depends how you look at it, right? If you look at the national conversation and who goes to these Laker games and who's sitting courtside and this and that, it's gonna seem like it's a Laker town, right? When you see when you see those types of things. But man, I mean, Dodgers are embedded into each home in this town. Like and I and like I'm saying this from the city of Palm Desert now, but but that's where I'm from, and um it runs super deep, So when it's the playoffs and things are going well, things aren't going, it weighs heavy. It weighs very heavy, and you get a feeling throughout the city when these things are happening, and um, and yeah, it's different than New York, but we got our own pressure here too, you know what I mean? Um, so for a team to be gritty enough to kind of withstand all that is special, right?
Yeah, absolutely special. It's and I would say for sure a narrative busted, and it's something that they can always draw from now. Know that
Yeah.
we can do this. We're a franchise that can do it
Mhm.
and have done.
Yeah, that's super valuable to have seen yourself go through something like that. Heck yeah, man. Um, so that's narrative number seven, and that's gonna lead us into the number eight narrative, right? And this is the one that we've heard over and over and over again for the past like 5 years or so, 4 or 5 years, is that the 2020 title was a Mickey Mouse title, that the Dodgers haven't won a legit World Series since 1988. Um, Frank, we weren't going to shake that one until we saw another one,
Right.
right? And every year that passed was getting further and further away from that. And the thoughts were creeping in the heads of everybody. And it's like, oh man, like when are we gonna like when's this gonna happen for us again, you know? Um, but how do we bust that narrative this year, Frank? How do we bust that narrative that 2020 was a Mickey Mouse title?
Well, especially from the standpoint of, I think one of the more solid, arguments, when because you just have the haters that just strictly hate,
Yeah.
but one of the solid arguments is if the Dodgers would have had to play an entire regular season in 2020, they would have choked again. That the only reason they were able to, you know, finish the job in 2020 and win that World Series is because of the shortened season. Um, I don't grant that as a fan. I don't accept that. I feel like, hey, that was the year that they could have and would have.
Hmm.
But it's an argument, and so from that reasonable standpoint, it's a hard one to shake. And so every year that they choked again, every year that they didn't get the job done after having a dominant regular season, it provided credence to that argument. Um, and this year, finally, that argument is not, it doesn't exist anymore because they
Hmm.
went from day one to the end, ended up with the best record, went in as the number one seed, faced arguably the toughest team in all of baseball
Hmm.
in the first round, went down in that series, came back to win, faced a really good team in the NLCS, got through that, undermanned, mind you,
Hmm.
and then faced the New York Yankees in the World Series,
Who had the best record of the American League? Yeah.
number one seed in the AL,
Hmm.
and handed it to them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah. It, I mean, I don't know. Baseball fans tend to be superstitious or, we believe in wonky things. I mean, I don't know, man. Like I think until we got another one after 2020, the feeling that there was some type of curse over the Dodgers for a lot of people was still there, you know? Um, and what this World Series title did was for sure shake that off, right? It's like almost you almost needed to win two to it wasn't until you won the second one to legitimize the first one for a lot
yeah,
of people, right? And look, I mean, that's for other people, right? That's not for us. Like we lived 2020 and we know what the Dodgers had to go through to win that title. Um and what every other team didn't do, right? To that season that the Dodgers did um to be able to. Uh but I mean I think it's extremely gratifying. I mean, it's extremely gratifying to win it this time around. You get some vindication, right? You get to have Clayton Kershaw have his moment, in front of the fans at the parade, and um, and it makes you think obviously of guys like Justin Turner and guys like that, and that they didn't get to enjoy a parade, but um, I think. I mean, look, we needed this one for that, right? We needed this one for that to kind of shut a few people up, because yeah, man. I mean, it would get annoying. I mean, that's just the fact of the matter, right? It was like, man, like, look, we had our talking points. We had our like, hey, like, just because your team didn't win it doesn't mean it wasn't legit, right? Like, if it was so easy, why didn't you win it? Like, and that's all real. Um, but my God, like the manner of which the Dodgers won this one was something else, man. Like uh, to get through, um, like you mentioned, the Padres, uh, you know, to beat I mean, the Mets who have beat us in the past too, but to just buzzsaw a Yankees team the way we did too, like, I mean, I think there's so many fan bases that did not think the Dodgers had that in them,
right.
and we hadn't really seen anything like it, right? And this year we got that, right? Some vindication, some validation, all those things. So, um, so that was part of what made it special, right? As it was happening, I mean, those are some of the emotions that I was overcoming, like of like, oh my gosh, like these are things that we've been on the other side of so many times, and um, and to just kind of see it happen in front of your own eyes, and to recall some of the times where it hasn't gone as well, and um, and look, on the topic of 2020, actually this morning I was like, let's remember 2020 a little bit. And I watched highlights of the NLCS, the entire NLCS, and Will Smith, Kike Hernandez having their big moments. And um, so when I think of this validating that, it's for guys like that, right? Like Will Smith was there, Kike Hernandez was there, like guys like that are the players they are now because of those types of experiences, and um, that were very, very real, uh, so it's special, man. I mean, I it's one of the more gratifying parts of it, right? Is
Right.
it's almost finally getting to collect that 2020, right? We felt it, we experienced it. I think this year we got to collect the 2020 title.
Yeah, for sure. And for all the narrative of they haven't won one since 1988, it was cool to see the 1988 tie-ins with this run. The Oral Hershiser and Walker Bueller relationship, and that cool shot of Bueller wearing Hershiser's game worn jersey and Hershiser wearing Bueller's jersey the day of the parade and celebration. Um, Obviously, the game one walk off between Kirk Gibson and Freddie Freeman and all the similarities there and whatnot. And that just makes it even more cool. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? That we got our 1988 moment in game one.
Yeah.
We got our 1988 pitching moment with Bueller doing what he did.
Mhm.
Obviously, they're not exactly the same, but they're similar enough where it's just such a connection.
Yeah, it was like I think enough time has passed and enough things have happened where we don't automatically even try to connect those dots anymore. It was kind of unwarranted, right? Like it was
Yeah,
kind of like it was happening, and you're like, oh my, what?
yeah, right.
Like, oh my, like you're realizing it, and that's what kind of makes it special too, right? Like it wasn't a forced thing. It was just in your face, like the Freddie Freeman home, the Grand Slam. I mean that what? Like
Joe Davis calling. I mean, yeah,
my goodness, let's talk about it. What a gift Joe Davis was to throughout this entire postseason, right? Like for him to be able to call that is such a gift, right? And it's the same types of gifts that Vince Scully would give us, right? By being the national broadcaster because of how good he is, right? Being able to call these Dodger moments. And are you kidding me? Fly ball, right field. She is gone. Are you kidding me? That I mean, talk about being in the moment. And I hope there's a day where I get to meet the Joe Davis. I'm sure there will be. Um, I just want to thank him. Like, thank you for giving us that because to be that locked into the moment, to have that understanding of that situation and to recall that in that moment. I mean, just to be that dialed in is so special, man, right? Like how much of a standout was Joe Davis this entire time?
all the way through. And even prior to the actual call and how iconic it's going to go down in history, but the setup was amazing. About Dodgers Yankees. Every kid's dream is a reality for Freddie Freeman right here, right now. The fact that it happened on the first pitch, and he didn't even have time to like think about, what am I going to say if it wasn't a Kirk Gibson full count. You know what I mean? It was just boom. As soon as he finished the setup, it's like, oh gosh. And he had to make the call. And for that to be what came out of his, as a call. And then I love when Smoltz says, it's just what does he say? It's just unbelievable. There's nothing else to say. It's just
Yeah,
unbelievable. It's like, would you say you don't
you can't.
believe, you can't believe what you just saw? It's like, oh my gosh.
Boom. And let's be real. None of us heard that while it was happening, right?
No, no.
We're all screaming at the top of our lungs, hugging our loved ones, right? Waking up our neighbors who were watching the game. Um, but the chills, like when we heard that call for the first time, and I mean, she is gone. That is chef's kiss. Beautiful. Um, Thank you, Joe Davis, for giving us that gift. Because, we people like us, man, I don't know, people like I'll speak for myself, but like I wasn't on this planet in 1988, and everybody wants to talk to you about 1988, and to not have moments like that for so long, you tend to kind of resent 1988, right?
Yeah.
With zero anticipation for the universe to gift you a moment like that, to tie it all in together, right? And um look, man, all you got to do is watch that game from the ninth inning to get fully invested in it, and to experience that moment, and to have enthusiasm, and to feel it, and to have the excitement and scream and get excited. All you had to do is watch that game from the ninth inning, right? But for people like you and I, obviously it didn't start in the ninth inning,
No.
right? It's a lifetime. It is every up and down, right? And when you talk about the levels of fandom, there's people that can always tell you like, oh, well, I bought this season tickets and I've done this and I've spent this amount of money and I watched this many games, this season, or I went to the game, I went to the like, sure, there's all that. Congratulations, and um those are all great things, but what does it mean to you when they lose? What does it do to you when they lose? Like like how much rides on every pitch, right? Um that's the real measuring stick, I think, in my opinion, right? And man, I mean, I have the term for it. It's the annual Dodger hangover, right? The day after they get eliminated every single season, you just wake up and your coffee tastes like shit, right? Like that's just kind of how it is. Um, that um, we avoided that this year, man. We didn't have to feel that this year. And so, I was with my cousins that night. They won the World Series, and we had a toast after. My cousin brought out a bottle. We all took a shot together, and I got to say the words, right? Because I'm the Dodger guy in the family, and I told him what I told him was, look, man, like I know this means a lot to all of us. We all love the Dodgers. We all love LA, and we all love. I was like, but the fact that anytime something happens with the Dodgers, you guys think of me is so special, right? It's such a special thing to me, and so when this happens, like we can all react the same physically, right? Like we can all jump up and down and
Yeah.
cry and scream, and we can all do that, right? That's all real. That's what every single one of us is experiencing. But oh my God, like how deep it goes down into our souls because of what we put into this. It's feels silly at times, right? There's probably multiple times over the course of your life if you ask yourself if it's worth it, like to put that much into it. Um, but we're drawn to it for a reason. It called this whole thing called us for a reason, and uh for me, I think part of it is, I learned this from the movie Fever Pitch. Judge me if you want, right? But like it's like the one part of our lives that we can't control, right? And I think as far as being a Dodger fan, we can't control what's going to happen on the field, right? At work I have a say, at home I have a say, right? uh when it comes to this team I don't, right? And I think there's something valuable about kind of just letting it all go and kind of seeing what happens. And uh, so, when you're gifted moments like that, and for it to tie in together, for Joe Davis to give us that gift of tying that to that moment way back then that we've just been harped on over and over and over again, that we've even built up maybe a little bit of resentment for over time. What a gift. What a gift, right?
Yes, sir. Absolutely. Thankful.
Yeah.
And I think one other thing I'll say about the whole 1988 and that narrative, and is or just narrative being busted is I don't think it bears mentioning, I should say, in my opinion, Kershaw having two rings versus ending his career potentially with just that one
Mhm.
Mickey Mouse quote unquote ring. I think is huge too for his legacy and
Yeah.
narratives, that's out there about him. Yes. Because the reality is, in my opinion, I remember I put out a tweet like earlier this year about how if in an alternate universe, Kershaw has like three or four rings and probably even a couple more Cy Youngs. You know what I mean? If he's not mishandled, if he's not falling apart like this at this stage of his career, maybe he keeps some of his velocity, so his effectiveness is a lot better. And so he's able to contribute like some of his contemporaries have been later in their careers. Um, and that isn't the case. But the fact that he's going to have this second ring and potentially even another uh, is going to be huge on how history looks back on his career.
Yeah. Yeah. I think obviously it was an injury riddled season. But like there's a reason he's, making the trips. Like you know, he was in the dugout during away games throughout the postseason. He's a valuable part of this team, and he really was, right? And the team kind of talks about just different points of the either the run or the World Series where they mention him, right? Where he ha- just knew his role on the bench, like in the World Series in that game five to be particular, to be specific, where he was telling people like, "Oh, we just need one. We just need one. Let's come on, come on, come on, come on." Keep kind of keeping people up, and it kind of snapped people into place. And who knows the consequence that had. But even Walker Buehler talking about, well, 22 would have done it, right? Like that's would have been 2010. 22 wasn't available, so I had to be the one to do it,
That's
right?
amazing.
That's crazy that they think of him that way still. You know what I mean? And we all know, like, hey, Buehler, you're the guy now, dude. Like, like, come on,
Yeah.
dude. Trust me. Even if he was healthy, it would have still been you and I,
Right, right.
But um, for them to have that regard, like just for them to revere him as much as they do, and so he did, have a hand in this as well, but regardless of the injuries. But look, Fernando got two, right? 1981 was his, right? Just like when the Dodgers won in 2020, it was Kershaw's, right? Like that was the one, that was the headline that Kershaw got his ring. Um, you know, Fernando got one in 88 as well, right? He was there, he was part of the organization, um and we never just say that Fernando just got one, right? We say
Right.
Fernando got two. So um, so that's special as well. So I'm glad we got to tie Kershaw into this. So look, I mean, obviously we've been talking a long time about these narratives, and we had a lot of fun doing it. I don't think we can go through this episode without getting into a little bit of the free agency talk and kind of what's going on out there. Look, specifically, I mean, we got to talk about it. It's Juan Soto, right? Dodgers had a meeting with him, um, you know, and I mean, undoubtedly the best free agent option out there. How do you feel about the possibility of the Dodgers signing Juan Soto? I mean, where do you stand with that?
Yeah, I feel I feel kind of the same way I felt when Bryce Harper was a free agent.
Okay.
And I remember saying then, like, hey, I'm good if we don't get him. We spend that money. That's prior to Mookie Betts' contract, prior to Freeman, prior to obviously Ohtani. That's at the time, the dollar figure was still, like, it'd be nice. Obviously, Bryce Harper's an amazing talent, but, we could use that money and allocate it better across multiple players as opposed to just one. So I feel similarly to Soto, even more in some regards, just because of the fact that um, we have, generational hitting talent in the lineup. But that being said, if you could add a guy like that, you have to due diligence. You have to do the due diligence to try. And if a guy like that, it's like the Warriors and Kevin Durant of sorts. You know what I mean? Like when they added Kevin Durant, were the Warriors supposed to not try to get him?
Right, 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 right.
You know what I mean? What was it like the Hamptons meeting with Iguodala and Draymond and
Yeah.
Steph and them going out there and meeting with him and recruiting him, whatever? Are Mookie and Otani and the guys, are they supposed to not, make a
Yeah.
pitch?
Yeah. Yeah.
Of course. And as far as the chances, yeah, I kind of feel like the Mets are the leaders in the clubhouse for just because the owner has on record and is proving to say, I'm not going to be outbid.
Mhm.
And I don't think the Dodgers want to get into a bidding war for any player at this point.
Yeah.
They had the bidding war last season with two players that they really coveted
Mhm.
and they got them both. So I don't see that. In order for the Dodgers to land Soto, there would have to be something that goes awry with the Mets negotiation, in my opinion.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's fair. Um, yeah, look, because I don't want to be the guy that's on the record to say like, "Oh, we don't need Soto. I don't want Soto." Like, because it's stupid. It's a
Yeah,
stupid. It is a stupid place to be, right? In history, that's the wrong side of history,
yeah.
right? Because of the player that he is and the player that he will end up being. Um, so I don't want that on the record, right? I tweeted, I don't know if it was about a week ago or so. I said something along the lines of like signing the Dodgers signing Juan Soto doesn't make sense to me other than the fact that it always makes sense to get the best player available.
Mm,
Like, does that make sense? Like that's kind of where I'm at. Like, um, and then also like the Ohtani contract broke all of our brains, right? I don't think any of us had $700 million
no.
anticipated. None of us did, right? Um, so that is so far past anything that we can really grasp and comprehend, right? Because we've heard baseball contracts were in the 300s, right? Like it was like that was like kind of where we're at. Like, oh, like hey,
Right.
how far it's come, right? I remember when the 200s were crazy, right? With the Pujolses and the A-Rods and the this and that.
Yeah.
Um, so then you get the Mookies and such in the 300s and the Aaron Judges in the 300s, and you're like, oh man, to go from that to 700 feels like monopoly money, right? Like that's what it feels like. It feels fake. It makes us feel like, well, what is money, right? Like what is that? I guess it doesn't really matter at the end of the day, right? Um, so I'm trying to distance myself from that and saying, hey, no, the Dodgers estimated or the Dodgers evaluated Shohei Ohtani at $700 million. That's what they did. That's what he is worth to them, right? So if I'm thinking that, you think of all the whys and hows and how that all makes sense. If Shohei Ohtani is worth $700 million, I don't think Juan Soto is worth 660. I don't, right? If that's the truth. Because of the international implications and value that Shohei Ohtani has, uh, Juan Soto doesn't have them. Shohei Ohtani is a two-way player, right? Juan Soto's not. Um, doesn't really even play defense well, right? Uh, so the way I look at it is that is okay, if we're actually trying to measure value, if Shohei Ohtani is a $700 million player, I don't think Juan Soto is a $660 million player. I don't think he's in the 600s. And so that's where I'm kind of like, okay. But also at the end of the day, what the heck is money? Like, I don't know. Like, I don't like the Shohei contract broke our brains, and now we don't know where we stand. That's kind of what it is. Like, okay, yeah, you spend 700, might as well spend another 600. I don't know. Like, so it's not my money. It's my money when I'm spending it on beer, right, at the stadium. But I mean, aside from that, like whatever, right? I'm of the theory, and I'm of the, I mean that the Dodgers. I mean, look, year one of Otani's contract couldn't have gotten any better financially. I don't think, right? Like, uh, jersey sales, ticket sales, World Series run, this, that. They're going to Tokyo next year. Get out of here, dude. Like that. I mean, come on. Like that. They're going to get even more money because of that trip, because of who they have on the roster. Um, I maintain that there's probably some type of exclusive Dodgers TV deal or streaming deal that's going to get worked out in Japan somewhere where they're just going to get the entire value of the contract back, I would imagine, right? Similar to what we did here with Spectrum. Like the Dodgers are going to own Japan from a baseball standpoint. And so that's where that money is a good investment. I just don't see the same with Juan Soto. Um, but hey, I really wouldn't mind penciling him in the lineup every single day and putting him in. Like I mean that's where I stand with him, right?
Yeah, same. Same
So,
here. It'd be a great luxury.
and that's what it would be at this point. I'm impressed with his character. It seems like everywhere he goes, people have amazing things to say about him, and um, he's a thorn in your side when he's on the other side, right? But I mean
Yeah, there's
that's
something about that. People talked about like, oh no, I don't want him because of the clubhouse presence that he brings or whatever, and I don't get that.
mhm.
Like when he was on the Padres, I felt like he was the less Padre of all of them.
Yeah,
You know what
yeah.
I mean?
Hmm.
Machado and Tatis and whatever.
Hmm.
Um, and even now in the Yankees, actually, here's the thing about the Yankees. Like I grew up hating the Yankees. Like I hated the Yankees more than any division rival outside of the Giants.
Hmm.
Um, growing up, I don't even hate the Yankees these days. Like Aaron Judge is like a nice guy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He's not like
Yeah.
a like what the 2000s Yankees, the late 90s. I hated those guys. Like I rooted against them so hard. Like between the Yankees and the Astros, I rather have the
Yeah,
Yankees
like I
be.
would say the only Yankee that I look at, I'm like, ugh, is like Garrett Cole because he used to wear an Astros jersey. Like
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
like
exactly.
that's like the only reason. Like, uh, yeah, I'm right there with you. Yeah, no, I think from everything you hear, Juan Soto is a high character guy that probably would slot perfectly into that clubhouse. I mean, I think they would love him. Um, but I don't know. I think that you are the Dodgers and he is the best free agent available. The meeting has to happen. I mean, especially it's here in Southern California. It's like a Newport Beach. Like it's like okay, like I think I'd be mad if they didn't take the meeting.
Yeah.
Um, but I just don't see that happening. But as far as the Dodgers free agents that um they could either keep or choose to keep or let walk. Is there anybody on that list, the Dodgers pending free agents, that you feel the Dodgers need to retain?
Well, because of how I feel the chances are for them to land Soto, and I don't believe that they will land him. Um, I think Teoscar's at the top of that list for me. Uh, Not just the production, which is big, but everything else that he brought to this team. The fact that he loved being a Dodger, the fact that he wants to continue being a Dodger, and he's not been shy to state that and make that known. Uh, yeah, the only way I would be okay with Teoscar not being on the roster is if they go and sign someone.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. I don't know where the Dodgers are in 2024 without Teoscar Hernandez,
Right.
right? Certainly not divisional champions, probably not, right? Like I don't like the value he had during the regular season, and then the massive moments he had in the postseason, like right. And you don't think about it that you can't think about it that way going forward, right? Next year's team's going to be next year's team,
Yeah.
and whatever. You build you build it differently, but um, when you see it work, right, and a player that's in his prime, when you see it, like, hey, this guy made it work here, I think that's worth uh, exploring again, right? Uh, because look, at worst, this was going to be, hey, flash in a pan, we got him in the perfect year in his career, brought us a title, you know, because sometimes you do run the risk of, hey, you had a chance to not sign him and get him when he was at his best, and now you're stuck with him for like a Chris Taylor type of situation.
Yeah.
Because those things do happen. But uh, but I think this is who Teoscar Hernandez can really be. I actually do think that. Um, I think he's a guy that really just embraced everything that the Dodgers had to offer him for his career. and really thrives off of playing next to talent. He said it himself. Like he's like, I'll take the pay cut, right? Which is on the annual side. Like I'll take the 1 year deal instead of taking years from other places to have the opportunity to learn from some of these guys, which is exactly the approach you want. Yeah, that's exactly the attitude you want from a guy like that. Um, so I would agree with that. I'm having a really hard time imagining Walker Bueller wearing a different uniform. That's not the Dodger uniform. Um,
Yeah, that's fair.
and I understand like it's playing on the emotions a little bit, right? And it was also kind of sudden, right? Because nobody had it written up that, or nobody had it would have been able to predict what he was able to do this postseason.
Right.
So we didn't know what type of leverage he'd have in the offseason. We didn't think it'd be this much, right? Um, so we all kind of took it as like, oh, he'll probably be back, right? Take a, qualifying offer or come back on a 2 year deal worth X amount of money or whatever. But this guy's gonna get some real offers out there, right? I think the Braves are interested um and to be honest, it's a pretty good freaking fit too, like for a player like Bueller to play for a team like the Braves. But um yes, it would be the perfect ending to his Dodger career. But I'm just not really ready to see him anywhere else, man. Like I don't know. Like I'm really struggling with that one right now. I don't know how you feel.
No, I mean I feel similar, but JT was endeared to me. You know what I mean? So seeing him gone, Kenley, even some of the younger guys who didn't spend as many years with the Dodgers, but Seager, Bellinger, there's a bunch of them out there now. Um, so yeah, I don't want to see Walker in another jersey, but if it happens that way, he deserves a payday. Especially considering the injury concerns that he's going to have from here on out. Because of that, if another team is the one that rewards him with the big payday, he deserves that. He 100% deserves it. And I won't be mad at him for going for that. And so if that's not the Dodgers, I understand that side of it as well.
Yeah. No, I mean, look, and well, I think both of us will always be on the side of guys taking as much money as they can, and um, I just didn't anticipate him having this much leverage this offseason. I
Right.
kind of just thought he was just gonna have to be a Dodger. And then the way this whole thing played out and the way the whole thing was like, oh, like what? Like I'm just not ready for it. Like I'm just not ready for it in other ways. Because Seager, you kind of saw it coming,
Yeah.
like you
The
kind
whole
of saw like,
season.
okay, he's gonna be a free agent, he's gonna get paid. And at the time, I remember we had Trey Turner and Gavin Lux was a highly touted prospect, and we're like, oh, like we're probably not gonna keep Seager. Justin Turner had already signed a couple of contracts with the Dodgers, and it was kind of like a situation where it's like, okay, but this is one where it snuck up on us quick. Like it was like,
Yeah.
oh man, like it's almost like you don't get a chance to say goodbye, like like it's one of those. Um, so I would, and look, now if I can logically talk myself into keeping him, um, look, what you can't get past is the fact that his elbow is going to have another expiration date, right, at some point. I mean, that's just how this goes. Um, he's on his second Tommy John surgery, and the second one doesn't last as long as the first one, typically, historically speaking, right? But the way I saw him pitch this postseason, Frank, I fell in love with it, right? His breaking ball usage, um,
Yeah.
it was awesome, and he really became a pitcher, right? He got back into a corner where he had to learn how to pitch, right? His fastball couldn't bail him out anymore.
Right.
Um, but that's not to say he doesn't have a good fastball because he still has that 95-mile-an-hour fastball. With life, with run, like it's not like a flat 95, right? It's got some life to it. Um, and with a full off season, he might be able to get that up to 96, 97 on a consistent basis. Who knows? So I think the value is there if the Dodgers want to explore that. And look, he wants to stay. Like, yeah, there's no way he wants to leave. So I just really hope they can make something work because um, I don't know. I just don't want to go to like through the next postseason without him. Like
Right.
I just don't want that to happen. So, um, and not to mention we do need to stack the starting pitching, man, because um, we saw what happened this year and we didn't expect that to happen. And looks like because of Shohei's shoulder, who knows if he's going to start the season as a pitcher or not. Um, Gavin Stone's gone for a while. Um, there's questions behind the guys that had injuries this year, right? The Glasnows and Kershaw, and who knows when Dustin May's going to come back as, and so it won't hurt. It couldn't hurt to have that arm, but we'll see, right? Is there anybody else that you think we gotta maybe keep or we have to let walk or I don't know?
Let walk. Yeah, I don't know if there's anyone on that list. You win a title, you want to run it back.
Mhm.
Um, I think Kike deserves mention, obviously, because of his postseason prowess and even nostalgia at this point. I mean, he's been with us for two different runs now. And he's produced. Kike is just one of those frustrating guys during the regular season. You know what I mean? 'Cause it's just like, God, this guy's
Yeah,
terrible.
Kike Hernandez at bat in June
No.
was not fun.
And so I, I I feel like with Edman and Taylor on the roster, Kike is pretty redundant as far as what he brings to the table,
Yeah,
skill wise. Um, so unless there's a way to move on from Chris Taylor, it feels like Kike might need to find a home elsewhere.
yeah.
Um, you know, but we'll see. We'll see how that plays out. Definitely legendary way for him to go out if this is it for him, Dodger Blue.
Yeah, that's the part of it you look at like, okay, like if there's a way for these guys to go out, it's this is the way, and but you know, like with Kike, it like a player like Kike always makes sense to have, right? Because of the versatility, because of this and that. But yeah, you mentioned it is a little bit redundant because of Tommy Edman and because of Chris Taylor. Um, I know the Dodgers have been linked to Willie Adames and possibly signing a guy like that. I personally think there might be some opportunities on the trading front
Yeah,
um, to acquire a shortstop, like an everyday shortstop, because I don't think you can roll into a season with, you know, Miguel Rojas at his age being the guy you expect to give you 150 starts. So I think if you can figure out a way to attach a Chris Taylor contract to one of those trades and maybe prospects, two prospects, whatever, to get like a notable shortstop, a guy that we can get some value out of. I think you do that, and then maybe that opens up the door for a guy like Kike Hernandez. So, so we'll see, man. I mean, it's just starting to heat up. They're saying Juan Soto is probably going to sign before the winter meetings, which would be great, right? Because typically it doesn't necessarily always work that way with Boris clients, right? They usually
right.
drag it out to the last possible second, and so I think they're learning. He's learning from the sins of his past, um, and really opening up the market to see what other teams can do and not handcuffing them. Uh, so we'll see, man. It's just starting to get interesting, man. But this was a fun one, talking about all these narratives.
Hey, well, because it's fun to be on this side of all the narratives at this point. That's what it is.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. For sure, man. So, anything you want to add last minute here before we sign off?
No, man.
Cool.
Always great talking, and I look forward to the next one.
Likewise, man. And look, thank you guys for sticking with us here through this one. Hope you guys had fun listening to these 8 narratives that were busted by the Dodgers. If there's any of these narratives that maybe you disagree with, or any narratives that come to mind that you'd like to add to the list, feel free to either comment it. We like to hear those things and chit chat with you guys about those things. So, and then of course the free agency talk. So, you can expect to hear more from us as the offseason progresses. So it's nice to have some consistency here. But as always, man, I'm Frank Lopez, alongside my co-host Frank Martinez. This is the Let's Be Frank podcast, and we'll see you guys next time. Peace.